Heath. I am Miss Robertson. I'm a trainee teacher who'll be working with Miss Boucher in Year 5. I'm super excited to meet you all. Today we are going to be covering Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and finishing off Chapter 1. I'll be continuing on from where Miss Boucher left it last. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when two owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought it just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak which swept to the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind his half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realise that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging through his cloak looking for something, but he did seem to realise he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He'd found what he was looking for inside of his pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up into the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone was to look out the window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see what was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside of his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had round its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctively ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I have never seen a cat sit so stiffly." "You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating?" "I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh, yes, everyone's been celebrating all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the muggles have noticed something's going on. It was in their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent? I bet that was Decimus Dingle. He never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. "I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably. "But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless. Out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumours. She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he would tell her something, but he didn't, so she went on. A fine thing it would be if, the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose it really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon? A what? A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think it was the moment for sherbet lemons. As I say, even if you-know-who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 sherbet lemons, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing when we keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I would never have. Only that's because you're, well, too noble to use them. Oh, it's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed this much since Madame Pomfrey told you like my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, the owls are nothing like the rumours that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying? About how he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him? It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason why she'd been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither as a cat or as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare that she did now. It was plain that what everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up at Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumour is that Lily and James Potter well, they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head, and Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James? I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, help us. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. They're saying he tried to kill the little boy, but no one knows why or how, or they're saying that they couldn't kill Harry Potter, but Voldemort's power he suddenly broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, after all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way? Yes, said Professor McGonagall. I don't suppose you're going to tell me why we're here of all places. I've come to give Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything that's happened to him when he's older. I've written him a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he wouldn't even remember. Can you not see how much better off he'll be, grown up away from all this until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it's wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled into a roar, and they both looked up at the sky. A huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, it was nothing compared to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. And where did you get that motorbike? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorbike as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent me it. I've got him, sir. No problems, were there? No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. He'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I would. I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one on myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give him here, Hagrid. We better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dudley's house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Shh! hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the muggles! Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor old Harry off to live with muggles. Yes, it's all very sad, but get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bungalow. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkle and light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Professor Dumbledore finally, that's it. We've got no business staying here. We might as well go join the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'll be taking Sirius on his bike back. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out a silver pot-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped into their street lamps, so that Privet Drive could glow suddenly orange, and he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat edges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside of his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he'd be woken up in a few hours' time by Mrs. Darcy's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know, at this very moment, people were meeting in secret all over the country and were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "It's Harry Potter, the boy who lived." And that's the end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed that. And on the back of that, I do have a couple of questions. So number 1, are you able to find 4 adjectives to describe Dumbledore? Number 2, who was the tabby cat? And number 3, who gave Hagrid the motorbike to transport Harry to Privet Drive? If you could email your answers to Mrs. Boucher, and hopefully I'll be seeing you all soon.